Welcome back to another video. In this week's video, I want to change things up a little bit and talk about some retro tech that doesn't need repair. At least not the ones I have. And that is the Clamshell iBook. Today we're taking a look at one of the most iconic, bizarre, and beautiful pieces of tech design ever made, the original Clamshell iBook. These bold laptops were announced in July of 1999, right at the height of Apple's colorful rebellion against boring beige boxes. Bright colors, rubber bumpers, a built-in handle. The design was loud in all the best ways. Steve Jobs himself called them iMacs to go, and that was exactly the idea. They came with a $1,599 MSRP price tag, equivalent to about $3,000 today, which was $300 more than the iMac G3 that had been introduced the year before in 1998. A 300 MHz Pentium 2 laptop such as the IBM 600E, also released in 1999, would cost in $1999 about $2,000 for the base model, so these were definitely competitively priced. As a lasting testament to their uniqueness, design, and style, they're on display at the London Design Museum as well as the Yale University Art Gallery. So I've got 3 iBooks here in my collection, 2 in blueberry and 1 in tangerine. Blueberry and tangerine were the first colors available, so the initial batch of Clamshell iBooks. Later on, Apple first added graphite when it released the iBook SE. And then after that, it released the Firewire iBook clamshells, which came in indigo and key lime. Key lime being available only when ordered from apple.com directly, so they're a bit more on the rare side. People joked at the time that they looked like toilet seats, more specifically Barbie's toilet. But design-wise, they broke every rule. There was no closing latch. The tension of the springs kept it closed. There was no cover on the ports. They were left exposed. There was concern that earlier ports used on previous laptops had wires and pins that were exposed, but with the iBook G3 clamshell, USB, headphone, Ethernet, modem, and power didn't have exposed pins, which meant that Apple could leave any sort of flaps or covering for these ports on their other model machines. For me, these are more than just another laptop in my iCollection. I happily used an iBook just like this in college. And it wasn't just for browsing the web and sending emails. I used it to run an IBM 3270 terminal emulator to write COBOL on an IBM mainframe running OS 390. Yep, that's right. I learned how to program COBOL in college, an MVS JCL, and all of those fun IBM things, which is boring. Corporate suit and tie, but I did it on an iBook G3 in blueberry, so that spiced things up a little. And on my iBook, one of the things I remember about it that I really liked was the pulsing light when the machine was sleeping. The little LED would slowly pulse on and off, almost like the machine was breathing or dreaming. Under the hood, you're looking at a PowerPC G3 CPU between 300 and 466 megahertz. The initial batch, of course, shipped with the 300 megahertz. They came with 32 megabytes of RAM stock, although officially it was upgradable to 320, though people did end up figuring out that you could put up to 512 megabytes into these machines. It came with a 12-inch 800 by 600 LCD screen. It was TFT, so it was not the best screen. TFT was not the top technology, but again, Apple was trying to make these affordable. So using cheaper parts did help them achieve that goal. Now, some people would take the later iBooks, the ones that were more laptop shaped, square, not clamshells. They could take those displays out and replace the display in these machines with those and then get a higher resolution display. So it was a bit of a hack, but it could be done. The screen that shipped with them, of course, 12 inches, 800 by 600. When they originally came out, they ran either macOS 8.6 or macOS 9. And you could install macOS 10, which I have installed on this one, and it ran okay. This one's upgraded to 128 megs of RAM, and it's fine. It's not a speed demon, but they did really run macOS 8, 6, and 9 very well. The clamshells introduced the unified logic board architecture. This means that Apple compressed the whole chipset into two chips, and they also added AGP and Ultra DMA. This allowed them to use the ATI Rage and later the ATI Rage 128 graphics chips in the Clamshell iBooks. The Clamshell iBook was actually the first mainstream consumer laptop to ship with Wi-Fi built in. Well, optionally built in. The airport cards ran on Lucent technology, which led to the mainstream adoption of Wi-Fi, also known as 802.11b, across the majority of PC manufacturers. Apple branded it Airport, and to show it off, Apple exec Phil Schiller literally jumped off of a stage holding an iBook live to prove that it stayed connected wirelessly.
Well, I did a demo of Apollo 11 since it's the 30th anniversary. Probably the appropriate thing to say is this is definitely one small step for a man and one giant leap for wireless networking.
Okay. So let's count and go down. We're going to go 3, 2, 1, jump. Ready? 3, 2, 1, jump.
No, that was a much better tech demo than when Chris Capicella simply plugged in a scanner to a Windows 98 machine.
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you plugged in a new device, and it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build, whoa. Moving right along.
That must be why we're not shipping Windows 98 yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But we can't talk about Microsoft's problems without also talking about Apple's problems. The iBook, it wasn't perfect. It was slow. It was underpowered. It didn't have much RAM. The keyboard was squishy. Replacing anything besides the airport card or the RAM was a monumental task. I think it takes 40 different screws, 8 varying lengths and sizes. The display cable can become flaky, the hinges can fail, the spring can fail, and not to mention that the little leaf in the Apple logo has fallen off of about 90% of the clamshell iBooks out there. So if you're looking to get one, it's probably not going to have a leaf. However, there are sellers on Etsy that make replacement leaves in all of the colors that you can buy and then put back in yours. Luckily, all 3 of mine still have the leaf, but it's a pretty common thing. Upgrading the RAM and installing the airport card, like I mentioned, super easy. This was back when Apple wanted you to still be able to do upgrades on your own. There's just 2 tabs you need to pop on the keyboard, and that reveals those areas. But continuing with the list of things that might be considered problems, there was no floppy drive, and this was at a time when all laptops had floppy drives. Apple had decided earlier in 1998 that with the iMac, they were discontinuing the floppy drive, among other technologies such as ADB, the serial and modem ports that they'd been using, and switched everything to USB. Now, of course, you could buy a USB floppy drive, but then that would just be an extra component to carry around with your laptop. Oddly enough, Apple also decided to not include PCM-CIA card slots in these machines. PCM-CIA, of course, standing for People Can't Memorize Computer Industry Acronyms, later named PC Card. Though the prosumer G3 PowerBooks had previously included PC card slots. So a bit of a strange decision there, but again, I think it was down to budget, and they probably understood that with the introduction of onboard Ethernet and onboard modem and Wi-Fi, there wasn't much need for PC card slots at that point. Most PC cards were modems or Wi-Fi cards or Ethernet cards. Also, let's talk about the power adapter. This was the power adapter. It was nicknamed the yo-yo power adapter. So the cord to the iBook would wrap around this, much like you would wind up a yo-yo, and then the power to the wall plugged in the back, and it could be wound around this as well. So the Clamshell iBook wasn't, at least to me, just a laptop. It was a statement, It brought fun to computing, and it said that computers could be part of your personality. They could be alive, they could be fun, they could be wonderful, and you didn't have to be tied to a boring IBM corporate gray machine or a beige box on your desk. These really changed computing for the better, in my opinion. And speaking of my opinion, more than two decades after these guys were released, I still think they're some of the coolest laptops ever made. Certainly some of the most unique. So if you ever had one of these, and if you have any fond memories, let me know in the comments. I'd love to read about your experience with the Clamshell iBooks. For me personally, it was a treat to be able to use one back when they were still relevant, and I'm especially happy to have these three in my collection. So anyway, thanks for hanging out with me today and celebrating some weird, wonderful Apple vintage tech, and we will see you in the next video.
Hi guys, make sure to like and subscribe and watch more of our videos later.